This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, or so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Hi there, I hope you're well. Today I'm going to be continuing the theme of selecting short bites from previous episodes so that I can hone in on some specific areas which I feel are important to address. In this particular episode, well, it's a very, very important one for sport coaches, and you could argue for sports psychologists too. My guest is Aaron Walsh, a highly esteemed mental performance coach. He's worked with a lot of elite sporting teams around the globe, and we go on to chew the fat and discuss a coach's influence on the integration of sports psychology and mental skills, methods sports psychologists can actually use to measure our work, so how we can be creative in that respect, especially when we're talking about athletes and players who have to perform well under pressure situations. Firstly though, I ask Aaron what his thoughts are on whether elite athletes believe mental toughness can be developed.
I think it's mixed. I think it has a lot to do with coaching, to be honest, because, like, ironically as it is, our coaches will go to great ends and means and resources and planning to develop one's physical and technical skills, and yet they ignore this large area. Maybe under the presumption, like when I talk to people, honestly, I'm doing a research, just finished a research project that's now getting reviewed, and it's around why hasn't mental skills been integrated into elite teams, and that's the subject that I've looked at, and it really goes back to a simple question: people don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. That's the big answer. People don't know what to do, and something that is unknown then has a limited predictability around its impact. So therefore, it's easier just to leave it alone.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, it is a difficult thing to measure, isn't it? That's one thing in sports science. Yeah. So big now. I can imagine that's factored in.
And I think you've got to be able to measure it, the impact of your work. I think all of us should. How we measure it's going to be really important. So like I know for the work I do, I have 3 areas that, I've agreed with the teams that I work in that I'd be judged over, or that I would be reviewed over, if you want to use that term. And that's around the idea of, did I provide the knowledge, tools, and support to help these athletes reach their capability as it relates to my area of expertise? Not outcome-based, but, obviously, as you know, if those 3 things happen, they perform better.
Yeah. In terms of how that's assessed, then what is it through like a survey monkey, that type of thing?
A little bit, but there's practical ways that you can do it. I think this is where, I don't try and be critical about it, but I think there's not a hell of a lot of creativity in the sports psych world at times. I think we sort of just go to these like models and things that we know well, rather than going, well, let's think outside of the box. So I'll give you an example. One thing I'll do with, a large percentage of our players is that I'll get their clips from the analyst. Then I ask them to go through every time they make a play, whether it's a pass, a kick, or, and I ask them to have 2 boxes. So one's called decision making, one's called skill execution, and they just mark a red or a green. So by the end of that, that's a lot of data, right? So you get to the end of 5 or 6 matches, you can actually see their decision making is getting better.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. Because, or if they're making a hell of a lot of good decisions, but their skill execution is poor, then it just gives you a bit of a target to work on. The NFL's done some cool stuff. So collectively, they've done some cool stuff. They did a study where I think they went over 556,000 players, imagine that. And they put a pressure rating on every play. So, and they determine pressure by time and left in game, scoreboard, where the team sat within the season, like quite a few good metrics that I thought was really, really good. And then, they were able to say, well, how does this team actually perform under pressure? Well, and so as a 1 would be first play of the season, a running play on the 25. Like there's no external pressure associated with that. But a 5 would be You know, a couple of years ago, like Russell Wilson had to throw, a pass got intercepted, unfortunately, but Russell Wilson would throw a pass that got intercepted on the final play to win the Super Bowl or lose it. So that'd be a 5. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
So like someone like Damian McKenzie, we can really easily go through his kicks like that, right? So a kick, first game of the season, out in front, 3 minutes into the game, that's a 1. But then like a couple of years ago, we won like 5 games in the last 5 minutes by less than 5 points. So they're all 5s, those kicks. So I think there's some real creative ways you can go about it, and then collectively can go, well, actually, are we getting better under pressure? So you think in a game like rugby, I reckon it's not that difficult, like before and halftime, 10 minutes before halftime, 5 minutes after halftime. How do we play? How do we perform? Coming out of the sheds, how do we play? If we go out to a lead, you know, like in New Zealand and Super Rugby this year, if you went out to a 14-point lead in the second half, about 70% of that time, that lead got reduced to 3 points.
Okay, so how can you deal with that?
Yeah, so we know waves are coming, like waves of pressure are going to come as the team that's now losing gets a little bit looser and we perhaps get a little bit tighter. So how do we manage that wave? And like to me, a mental growth of we now put teams away. Yeah, that would be sort of ways we can. And yes, can we look at that and go, yes, that's completely mental? No, of course we can't. But a sport like rugby, you can't say it's completely physical. You can't say it's completely skill-based. It's a blend. So, you know, you can't be absolutes about why teams win and don't win without considering both the objective factors, which might sit on a GPS, but the subjective factors, which might be things like the way that you mentally prepare or the way that you finish off games. They all have got to be blended into the same thing.
No, I'd agree. And it would be so easy just to ditch the mental side completely and focus solely on the technical, tactical, physical.
Yeah.
One other thing that springs to mind when you're talking there about creativity is mistakes. When individuals make mistakes, how do they then bounce back? Surely that's an important thing to be looking at as well.
I think, you know, there's some really good research. Again, I'll see. I can't. I was just seeing if I could find it here. I can't. But there's some really good research around like mistakes made in the first few minutes of games, and then touches that player has throughout the game compared to a game where they didn't make mistakes. And we know there's a decrease, right? So we do know that, like something like the ability to recognize that I would potentially go into my shell, underplay, and be safe because of the fear that I have around underperforming. I've made a mistake. I don't want to make another one. But then again, we can look at that and go, okay, well, what is the environment doing to create that mindset? So are we actually allowing freedom in our players? Because I've been doing this for quite a while, mate, and I understand, which I really do understand at this point, is that you can have a coach that can stand in front of the room and say, I want you to be yourself, express yourself, and be free. Then they walk in on Monday morning with 9 clips of mistakes. You're done. You're done. It's because no matter what you've said, your actions have said that there's high consequences to errors.
Yeah.
That's what they hear. They don't hear the 5 minutes on a Thursday you play free. They feel the shame of walking to your office on a Monday morning and you've got all the clips out. And then they go, well, what are we meant to do here? And I don't think any player is asking for no responsibility, no accountability. But what they're asking for is, I'm not a robot. I play in a really fast-paced game. It's evasive. The skill set's demanding. I'm not going to be perfect all the time. Is that okay?
So then surely the way the videos are used, performance analysis, that's got to be a massive factor in the mindset.
So I think about players when I'm talking, what are the 2 things that make you both nervous throughout the year? Number 1 is testing day, which is always really interesting, like a Bronco or a yo-yo, because you can't hide. The second thing would be review Mondays after they haven't performed well, wondering whether they're going to get exposed in front of the team. You might be able to help me here, mate. Why do coaches know this? Why do they still do it in the name of accountability? They know it causes shame and embarrassment. They know it causes our players to go into their shells. We know that they fear it and they have anxiety about it when they come into the building. Why do it?
Is that because the coach's focus is solely on results? Obviously, as you say, if you're trying to build a confident, fearless athlete, you're not going to do that by approaching it in that way.
And I suppose I was pretty lucky. I went with a really awesome coach early in my career, actually in baseball. And he had a philosophy or a principle, which was praise in public, correct in private. And I really liked that. So he would do even if after a bad loss, he'd find 2 or 3 things, but any of the correction would be done in the office just with him and the player.
I'm really grateful for Aaron's wisdom there. There are some really helpful reminders regarding the influence of culture and environment surrounding the integration of sports psychology, as well as with the development of mental toughness and other mental skills. I'm going to simply leave you today with a couple of questions to ponder, whether you're a sport coach, a sports psychologist, a mental performance coach, a parent or a teacher. So number 1, and this is a really important question, is what mental skills would you like the person or the athlete in front of you to develop? Perhaps confidence or resilience. And then secondly, is the way that you communicate taking into account the feelings of the other person? And I'm not just talking about the words here. I'm talking about where you have that conversation. Is the setting right? And the tone of your voice? Then there's the timing. Are you actually in a good frame of mind to have this conversation? Or are you overly emotional? Or are they overly emotional when you're trying to have this discussion? What is your motivation around this discussion? Is it attached to outcomes or poor performances? But certainly, when you do have these conversations, please do go back to that first question. An awful lot about the conversation that you're going to have, well, that's what you need to go back to. That's what you need to consider. Are you actually helping develop their confidence or their resilience? So that's all from me for today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Again, it's certainly given me some timely reminders on my role as a sports psychologist, especially the measurability aspect and how I can up my game with the teams that I work with and the individual athletes that I support too. And then I can recapture some of that creativity that sometimes gets a little bit lost in the day-to-day routines and busyness of life. And in terms of creativity, feel free to sign up to the Mental Edge newsletter. It comes out on a fortnightly basis right now. This is where I do try to get my creative juices out, where I put into the Mental Edge lots of tips, tricks, resources, and different ideas to help you if you're an athlete, a coach, a sports psychologist, or a mental performance coach. Feel free to sign up. The details are in the show notes. And one more thing. In last Friday's episode, I forgot to mention the fact that I was starting another series of football-related podcast episodes on a Tuesday. So as well as hearing from me next Friday with another fantastic guest, you will also hear me on a Tuesday too. And that will be the second of a series of 6 episodes that relate to mental toughness development in a football or soccer context. Have a great week. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.